carbon. Okay, so over the last year or so, Carbon Copy has been taking a series of dives into what's happening with India's energy transition. It's taken the form of relatively long reported articles on how each of the principal fuels that we use is essentially shaping up. What are the factors enabling its growth? What are the factors disabling its growth? And we started with gas, we went on to coal, we came over to solar. And in today's chat, we wanted to sort of build on some of the wider patterns that we've been seeing by getting Mr. Jain, Mr. Hasurkar, and Mr. Khatel Sal to weigh in on them. I will now fork this camera off over to Aarti, who is going to give us more context on this workshop and locate this conversation in a wider context. And then Aarti, over to you.
Thanks, Shekhar, and morning, everybody. My name is Aarti Khosla. I work with Climate Trends. For those of us who haven't met, Climate Trends is an organization which is mostly focused at the interface of linking climate energy conversations with both the broader public as well as the decision makers. And we do that by engaging with a lot of journalists, some of whom will be on the call today, and also by engaging with state governments, with policymakers, and trying to move the needle on either power sector transformation or transport sector transformation, but from an eye on climate action. So most of what we view is from a climate lens, and which is why the objectives of our organization. But having said that, what we wanted to do today was to have a conversation on where do India's renewable targets fit in terms of the broader energy transition, and what does it mean in terms of what's happening to the solar sector, but also what's happening to coal. And which is why we have two of our other colleagues. We have Aditya, who is with Ember and a senior electricity analyst. And we also have Vibhuti, who's the India lead for IEEFA, and is going to present her perspectives on recent developments in coal and whether they are counterintuitive or as expected. But before I do that, I also just wanted to preface the entire conversation with the fact that on the one hand, it feels that internationally, India has given quite ambitious targets which are aligned, or are input, so to speak, for the Paris Agreement, where we had committed for renewable installations such that India meets 40% of its electricity should come from renewables, from non-fossil fuels. We are already at a point where it is 37 or 38%. So to that extent, I think the goals on energy transition have also been a little bit of a low-hanging fruit. And it feels that the domestic targets that we've set up for ourselves, which essentially are 40,000 gigawatts by 2030, are not just ambitious, but if done right, they will also possibly mean that things like the solar energy will be the cheapest, and with better forecasting, scheduling, and improved innovations in things like battery storage, it will be a game changer. There are two ways in which we would like to look at this conversation. We will have Shekhar in the second half talking two or three experts who are from the solar developer and the manufacturing side on what is happening what is happening to the situation at ground zero. But before that, we just wanted to have 20 minutes of discussion between Aditya and Vibhuti to talk about what the coal pipeline looks like with so much capacity for renewables and the massive targets that we've committed ourselves to. What will happen to what we have committed on coal? Coal is already languishing in the long term. There is slight spikes that you see in the middle. Will that situation increase or deteriorate? What will happen to it? Given the renewable targets that are quite ambitious, they might turn into India's international targets as well, not just domestic targets. And a conversation on how everything essentially stacks up for us. Right now, it feels that India is in an all-the-above approach where we are ramping up coal mining. We are also increasing renewable capacity. We are talking of round-the-clock supply of power. We are also discussing things like battery storage, but we don't have one clear path. Maybe the next couple of years are inflection or not, but possibly, I think at this moment, I will draw you in, Vibhuti, to talk about what you think are recent developments that are happening in coal. And we saw some of the reports which said that the demand has increased. Some plants are in critical shortage of coal supply, and there is an increased demand of coal that is happening. Is this the short term? Will it be the phase of the long term as well, or is it expected and not counterintuitive?
Thanks, Aarti, for setting the context. I mean, yes, there has been some increase in demand lately, but I would just like to take you back a little, just few months before, and then, compare and then make a case whether at all how the situation of coal has been in the past versus now, and whether it's momentary or it's likely to continue. So firstly, what we saw due to impact of COVID-19 and the lockdown in various states last year, the demand for electricity dropped. And as a consequence, the coal stockpiles in India hit a new record high of 132 million tons at the end of financial year 2021, which was far exceeding the average of the previous 5 years of 80 million tons. This was done, analysis was done by one of my colleagues, Dr. Charles Warringham, in the month of April this year. So this was the situation then. So if you looked at 2020, 2021, we were sitting on huge coal stockpile. But, and that also prevented power plants to buy more coals as they were running at very, very low PLF. So in April 2021, the mines were standing at roughly 2 months supplies, and India's coal stockpiles, were able to meet any continuation in the current jump in electricity generation, even if the coal production remains static for the next few months. But came August 2021 and the scenario changed, especially in the last 2-3 weeks, which led to increase in demand and the reduction in the coal stockpiles, which kind of led both the Minister R.K. Singh as well as the Power Secretary looking at possibility of reducing the benchmark of 14 days of coal stocks to 10 days for identifying and diverting coal to plants with extremely depleted stocks. Further, the government started pushing captive mines to ensure maximum use, as well as for plants which had PPAs for imported coal to start importing more coal. So while the situation changed, but the situation is a bit kind of a momentary, because we have seen that in July to September, in most of the years, the coal supply situation does get impacted due to monsoon. So while coal supply reduces during these monsoon months, however, we have witnessed very, very high demand. So India reached its 200 gigawatt of peak demand just again few days back. So both the situation kind of added to this situation, while there was good hydro available during monsoons, but this time we didn't see that also happening. So which kind of increased pressure on the coal plants again. But this situation, I believe, could have been averted with more renewable energy deployment, which kind of suffered last year due to policy uncertainty. And there were about 19 gigawatt of unsigned PPAs, which are still sitting with SECI, some of which have been resolved, but there is a huge pile of capacity for which the PPAs have not been signed. And renewable energy could have met that additional demand, but we did not see that kind of deployment happening. In the recent, again, few weeks, we have seen more and more auctions coming up. So while renewable energy will kind of be able to meet that increased demand, but this shortfall in the deployment of renewable energy, on the other hand, hydro not being available to the extent that is available largely during this time of the period, and on top of it, with the increased demand, the situation kind of worsened. But I don't see that happening on a continuous basis. And Another important thing that I would want to talk about is that India came out with bid for 67 mines, but received responses only for few of them, with 48 bids received no responses at all. So which kind of reflect the investors' appetite for a sector clouded by environmental concerns and low margins. So clearly, while private sector was interested in the thermal sector a few years back, but they burned their fingers and they would not like to expose themselves to any more to this loss-making sector. So this is what I feel is the way forward. And with more distributed renewable energy generation coming into force, we will see that there will be a lot of demand from behind the meter as well. So we will have CNI consumers shifting to either accessing renewable energy through open access route or installation at their own end through rooftop solar installation, or even in agriculture, a lot of push is given on solar irrigation. So this will kind of again shave off a lot of demand from the grid. I will stop here. Happy to take up any questions later.
Thanks, Vibhuti. I think the last point that you said of agriculture and solar, maybe those kind of things will also be useful, especially when you look at the land use for solar, how much land is required for big plants. And, a lot of journalists might have seen those canal top solar rooftops. Some of us have filed stories on that as well. And maybe, that's one thing to discuss. But essentially then what you said is that it makes for a temporary story, but not a permanent situation. And to some extent, that's how it will be till the time you don't have instantaneous power coming from renewables, and you will have to be dealing with that flip-flop. But, going ahead, Aditya, maybe if you can talk a little bit, your report recently got quite some coverage, including reports in Economic Times and others, where you spoke about zombie plants. So essentially, pre-permit and under construction plants, if they are made now, they will not be futuristic bets, to place it in simple language. And, we already see when giants like NTPC and others start investing in renewables, it's not just for the love of renewables, it's also because that's where the investor money will be. So what do you have to say about the zombie assets that we are building? And that's a nice word. We spoke about stranded assets a couple of years ago, and that concept got quite mainstreamed. But I think zombie is far more concerning than just stranded assets. So how is it that future coal would only languish if there is any?
First of all, thank you so much, Aarti, for setting this up, and very good afternoon to everybody. So the analysis that we did at Ember, kind of backs what Vibhuti was just saying. In the long run, what we are seeing is that appetite for the appetite for coal has already gone down in the private sector, and in the long run, it might be even worse. So in this particular report, we set out to answer whether India even needs to build new coal power plants beyond what is already under construction, and figure out if any of these plants are creating points of inefficiency within the power sector. As I work for a company which analyzes data, I thought it would be good to kind of present a couple of charts from the report. So I'll just quickly share my screen, and we can get started. If you can see my screen now.
Yes, you can zoom in. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this report was done in collaboration with Climate Risk Horizons, and like I said, we set out to understand whether India even needs to build any coal power plants. And what we found was that there are about 27 gigawatts of coal power plants which are either in the pre-construction phases of development, which are surplus to the requirements, which would end up underutilized, and which would end up being money guzzling entities, and essentially threaten India's massive 450 gigawatt target. So what do I mean by that? So what we did first was to look at coal generation in India, and electricity demand in India, and we tried to figure out what the coal generation in 2030 might look like, assuming a strong 5% electricity 5% growth rate of power demand to 2030. And as you can see from this chart, in that case, the electricity demand would grow from like 1381 last financial year to 2144 terawatt hours, 1381 terawatt hours to 2144 terawatt hours in 2030. So the green bit and the gray bit that you're seeing here are the forecasts taken from CEA's optimal generation capacity mix report, which represent renewable generation and other non-coal, non-renewable generation here. So this will leave us with a coal-fired generation of 984 terawatt hours by end of this decade. So that is basically almost at the level of coal-fired generation that we've seen in financial year 2020, or a little less even. And so that made us question why, like, if that is the case, why is India even building these coal power plants? The answer is pretty simple. India wants to keep its lights on by 2030, and answer lies in the peak demand calculations. So whether India is able to keep its lights on in 2030 will depend on three things. One, how is India's peak demand going to increase to 2030? Two, what kind of installed capacity India will have in place by 2030? And three, what is the time of the day when peak demand could be expected to be seen in 2030? And that's what we tried to figure out. So that's what I'm trying to show in the next chart. So the peak demand that we've seen in July of this year, we saw a record high of 200.6 gigawatts. And if we assume a 5.2% CAGR, it is likely to hit 301 gigawatt by 2030 by financial year 2030. This 5.2% is in line with the projections, which in line with the forecast which the CEA makes in the OGCM report. So in order to meet this, India would have about 765 gigawatts of installed capacity if we assume that beyond the 33 gigawatts which are already under construction, 33 gigawatts of coal which is already under construction, India doesn't build anymore. India also goes through with its plans to retire plants older than 25 years. Right now it is just as set out as a recommendation in the National Electricity Plan 13. But if India does go through with it, we would end up retiring 54 gigawatts. So even with that, India will have a massive, India will have a firm capacity of about 350 gigawatts to meet a peak demand of 301. Now, what becomes important is how we bring this green bit into play to meet this peak demand. And the green bit here is basically variable generation coming from wind and solar, and this includes 280 gigawatts of solar and 140 gigawatts of wind. And the way we do it, I think. So there are in the current setting, especially as India is kind of dragging itself out of the pandemic, what we have seen is that in the last 9 months, peak demands have occurred during the daytime, during the sunlight hours. And this is kind of going against the trend a little bit. Traditionally, peak demands have been seen during the evenings. So that is kind of changed. It remains to be seen whether this sustains till 2030. But if it if some of the demand from the evening time kind of gets shifted to the morning hours, this massive planned solar capacity will come into play to meet this demand. And just to add one final bit on that, air conditioning growth is also going to impact the peak demand calculations. It is expected that air conditioning sector will kind of take off in the next 5 to 10 years, and much of the load is likely to happen during the daytime because of that. And Bloomberg actually has even published a report showing that by 2030 that is more likely to be the case than evening peaks. But even if evening peaks occur, actually what our report found was that investing more on renewables and storage is a much flexible, cheaper and viable option at this point in time. I'll preface the whole discussion here by showing one final graph. So everything is dependent on India meeting the 450 gigawatt RE target it has for 2030. So right now, that would mean India would need to add about 40 gigawatts almost every year in the next 8 years, which is a massive feat in itself. But the industry is starting to respond to this call. So I've looked at 10 power generators in India from the recent years who have announced their commitments for RE and commitments / targets. And I found that about 302 gigawatts have already been committed. There is still a long way to go, but this is a good start. And I'm actually looking forward to the panelists to speak about some of the challenges in actually meeting this target. I'll leave it at that and give it back to you, Aarti. Happy to discuss any of this.
Thanks, Aditya. Extremely interesting. I mean, as you can see in your slide, I think close to 200 of the 450 gigawatts will only come from Reliance and NTPC. And between the two big giants, I think we would have wrapped up half of India's net zero, if that's a very simple way to put it. But I think it also shows the power of geo for using the cliche, but speaks to a lot of what the private sector can turn around, where the future will lie, and the fact that a lot of this will not just be India's climate targets, like some of us talk about it, but mostly will be the way the energy mix will literally transform itself. I also saw, you talked about the shift in the peak demand times and all of that. I think that's where it becomes slightly more technical for me to gather. But the bottom line remains that even if a certain 5% of GDP were considered between now and 2030, essentially you don't need to build more coal. So clearly, if you look at the political statements, India has been shying away from giving a dateline to coal and has not made any statement, at least at the central level, on no new coal. While there have been states like Gujarat who have said it a couple of times, and also Maharashtra has alluded to it. But I think one thing is clear from your presentation, that despite the challenges in renewables, the sector is kind of poised to be the future in any case. And I'll leave it at that for the moment. We will come back maybe for the Q&A round. But I think at this point then, Shekhar, important to hand it back to you, because you see, both Vibhuti and Aditya have spoken about what the challenges in the coal sector are at the moment, but certainly if solar is set to perform and will be a game changer, then you have to talk about things that lie in the middle, whether it's battery storage or forecasting or issues with regulators or DISCOM hesitation and financial incapabilities, etc. And at this moment, I'm myself incapable of saying more, but I'll just leave it to you and our three eminent experts who can talk a little more and shine some light on the solar sector itself. I'll pause and the floor is yours, Shekhar.
Yeah, thanks, Aarti. Thanks, everyone. So for me as a reporter writing on energy, the whole thing has been a massive complex of paradoxes. At one level, when you look at India's energy policy, we seem to be simultaneously pushing renewables and fossil fuels. It's an outcome where any energy transition then has to be driven by not policy, but price. And there you find that solar actually is sort of becoming competitive against fossil fuels. And therefore, a sort of a virtuous energy transition actually being underway. This, however, is massively undercut by the fact that India's solar sector has now begun struggling. The reasons are varied, they're fairly well known. I mean, there are shifting goalposts, there are policy flip-flops, there is the failure to design a good market for solar itself. And so in this conversation, we will fundamentally, I think, focus on forward-looking questions in terms of what is now required to sort of get solar growing at the rate at which it needs to grow for, well, the Earth's sake, I suppose. My first question is for Mr. Khatel Sal. Two questions really. One, I wanted to get a sense of the technological issues involved in getting solar to grow more, by which I primarily mean storage. So, and Santosh, I know that you've been sort of looking at the storage aspects of solar very, very closely for a while now. And so it would be good to get an overview from you on how that piece is shaping up. How close are we to a breakthrough with storage and 24/7 solar, etc. Right? Question one. Two, I'm in Bombay right now, and I'm having a bunch of conversations with people around energy. And the kind of the quantum of land that will be required for these parks itself is a non-trivial question. And so I would like to get your thoughts on both of these aspects, and then I'll move on to Mr. Hasurkar.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Raj, and thanks for having me on this. So from my point of view, I'll just touch upon also a bit on manufacturing of solar just for a minute, and then in the technology context, I'll move to storage because they're kind of interlinked, right? So India, for the last 10 years, for the last decade, India focused pretty much on investing in solar power plants, largely through equity that was coming from outside the country. So that is how it moved. The products were free to come into the country up till 2018, at which point safeguard duties kicked in. Safeguard duties got kicked in largely because India lost a case in WTO against the ring-fenced walled garden called domestic content requirement, DCR category. So now with the 40% duties coming from next April onwards to incentivize manufacturing, one hand there is a wall called the import duty of 40%, the other hand there is production linked incentive, that's the carrot. The combination of the cane and the carrot is we are going to know about it in the next 15 days, 10 days in fact. By 15th of September, there'll be announcements coming on who shortlists for these incentive schemes. 3 gigawatts is the India's cell manufacturing capacity. 2 are old technology, which is polycrystalline, which is phasing out already in the rest of the world. 1 gigawatt is the PERC technology, which is today's state of the art. So that is the first part to remember. 6.8 gigawatts of commitments have happened from the Indian industry in manufacturing of domestic cells. So if you take that as reality and take the one that exists today, 7.8 gigawatts is the cell manufacturing capacity that is likely to come up with the PIL announcement being granted. Modules, India has a capacity of roughly 15 gigawatts, but vintage equipment, again, polycrystalline lines, imported cell from China, a bunch of other ifs and buts. So let's assume that a 7 gigawatt cell is going to remain. Now, with the current target, 40 gigawatts is installed, 35 gigawatts is in pipeline. So if you add the two up and subtract it from the 230, you end up with a requirement of roughly around 25 to 30 gigawatt per annum, which means India from the current 7 gigawatt, 8 gigawatt per annum has to jump up to that stage straight away, right? That is the challenge. Can this happen completely through domestic manufacturing? I doubt it. Yeah. So there has to be an import of material, and this wall of 40% that's been created will lead to a 15% increase in capex cost of each megawatt of solar next year onwards. So the cost of energy is going to go up 15% pretty much. Yeah. So now on the storage side of it, as Aditya was pointing out, rightly so, the CEA's own report recently released says if we use coal for peak power, the cost of coal energy will be 6 to 7 rupees a kilowatt hour because the plants will operate at 20 to 25% PLF only. And that's a fact. So they recommend let's go with battery storage. Now on the battery storage front, again, there is a production linked incentive running. And this incentive again has a bunch of guys interested in it. Joint ventures are getting formed. Exide has a JV already running and a plant being set up in Gujarat. Automotive batteries, already there's a plant existing between Mitsubishi, Suzuki in Gujarat. There are announcements just recently happened for South India with Lucas saying they'll come up with storage also. And the traditional battery manufacturers like Amar Raja are also announced coming into the storage on the lithium side. So a bunch of guys are coming into lithium. However, one has to remember that automotive grade batteries and energy storage batteries are not the same. Automotive grade is a traction and instantaneous power generation. Their life Their costs are different compared to energy storage, where you need to have a certain turnaround efficiencies that are different, costs that are different. Now, from a point of view of technology, lithium obviously is the winner right now in terms of round trip efficiencies, in terms of what is called energy density, that is the amount of energy it can store for a given mass, as well as how much you lose in the act of charging and discharging it. It has the least footprint of loss. However, lithium deposits are scarce, as you know, in the world, and probably most of you know, China is already dominating African mines, Central American mines. They've invested in some of these places, and hence lithium is again going to be a war which will be geopolitical in a way as well. Zinc air is another technology that is promising, and zinc air would be coming in fairly soon into commercial scales. Redox batteries, or what is called flow batteries, is also another technology. US has funded quite a lot of initiatives on this. Commercially, redox is available today, in fact, but of course, its efficiency and round trip, that means how much energy you lose, has to be improved further with time. So in a sense, on storage, there are two things happening. One, there are a bunch of companies that are coming into India, setting up manufacturing. Bunch of them are doing it for automotive as an end goal. So I believe automotive will lead storage. Automotive is a larger market for energy storage. The storage on the power side will kind of piggyback on the automotive developments done, is my personal belief. I believe the money of R&D will go more towards that, and the consequence of it would also be that we will have batteries coming out for energy. I believe there will be two schools coming in. The schools of batteries for automotive and batteries for energy storage, and they'll not be identical. For the next few years, lithium will dominate for sure, both. But at some point of time, I see redox and flow and cheaper chemistries with items not like lithium, which are very rare in Earth, coming for the energy side of it, and the automotive going in another direction. So this separation should happen fairly soon. In terms of the answer on the peak power plants, it is not coal, it has to be with storage. The other part is also around technology with hydrogen. So so storage is not necessarily battery. So there is also the hydrogen side of it, and the green hydrogen, what we call. And this is another area which is poised to take off quite well. Of course, there are still technological hurdles in terms of the conversion efficiencies. From sunlight, if you take all the way to the hydrogen output, there are it's still way to go. There is also the cost element, but it's something which is achievable because the materials that we are using is quite base. There is no rare materials that are getting deployed out here. On added top of it, there is a bunch of energy requirements that comes due to heat, not only due to electricity. See, electricity can only go up to a certain point in carbon mitigation because a bunch of energy requirement is coming due to heat. Hydrogen can handle the heat side also to an extent fairly well. So that's the other answer. Flywheel storage, not so much. I don't think that will be primary. Pump storage is already used to a large extent and would continue to be used. And at a certain large scales, it is still relevant, and a battery will not be relevant at such large scales. So I think storage will go on 2 or 3 platforms, not on a single platform. So that's on the first part of it. The second part of it on land usage, the efficiency of silica-based technology caps at 25-26%. Technically, theoretically, there is no way you can cross 30% conversion efficiency with silica. It simply does not have electrons that much in its valence electrode or in the outermost orbit to have them to make that happen. So there are 2 or 3 others. TOPCon is a version of technology that is coming up. In all likelihood, some of the new announcements, say for example, Reliance have hinted in a webinar I chaired recently that they would not be going with traditional Chinese dictated PERC technology, but would leapfrog into TOPCon. There is also technology that is coating a layer of thin film on top of the existing one called IBC. So there are 2 or 3 other technologies in the cell side that are likely to dominate. With all of this, land usage will come down, but will not eliminate. So land usage is still going to be a serious challenge in a way in India, given the density of our population. And the solar tech can reduce it, but will not drastically alter it. I mean, it can reduce it by 15, 20, 30% over the next 8-10 years, but not more than that is what I feel. So that's my response.
Okay, so Santosh, one quick question. There seems to be a lot of market activity as far as hydrogen is concerned in India right now. Not just Reliance, other companies too. So just give me a sense. I was talking to people who were saying that the costs have to come down by 2/3 for it to be competitive, etc. How do those timelines look? Are we moving in that kind of a direction? How do you sort of rate the current level of market activity around hydrogen?
Let's see, from a hydrogen perspective, the way I look at it is hydrogen as hydrogen has no sense. Hydrogen needs to become something. Ammonia, methanol, hydrazine. So the end product can't be just hydrogen, because hydrogen is the second most deadliest substance. So you can't handle it easily. Yeah, you can't transport it, you can't compress it. So it will be difficult. Ammonia, combusting ammonia is one of the techniques people are already working on. There are technologies available today to do that. Methanol is another stuff. So there are 2 sides to this industry. There is a side of taking water, purifying it, using grid energy and breaking it up into hydrogen and oxygen. That is electrolyzer industry. That's the wall. Below the electrolyzer, there is existing petrochemical chaps. They will take over. That's my reading. I don't think we need a new entrant to come in. Once hydrogen is produced, there is existing petrochemical industry which knows what to do with hydrogen to convert it into methanol and ammonia and others. And they will simply take the source from green and not from petrochemical anymore. So I think that is the way one of the way to look at it. From a timing perspective, batteries are way advanced for sure. Hydrogen is behind, and I would sense at least a 5 to 6 years before hydrogen starts to become commercially deployable. It is on a stage where it is early adoption phase. It is not a lab phase. It is a proven technology. It is early adoption phase. From early adoption phase to mass adoption phase, there is a timeline, and that will be about 5 years-ish is my gut feel. Minimal, maybe more than that.
Okay, thanks for this. I have a question for Mr. Hasurkar. Mr. Hasurkar, while in Bombay, I've been having a bunch of chats with people about ESG. And given that the policy regime is incoherent and contradictory, how do you see market interventions like ESG in terms of their effectiveness vis-a-vis pushing us towards cleaner energy?
Well, ESG, frankly, I don't see it as a key driver of policy. I mean, governments typically are driven more by economic objectives, of course, combined with other aspects, etc. So I think the driver of clean energy is essentially, I mean, we can't get away from the economics of it. The other benefits, of course, also come in and enhance, and there is a strong movement all around for ESG to be as an imperative. But let me look at this from a 36,000-foot view of 3 aspects. One is the technology, the second is the market, and the third is finance. So ESG concerns have risen now to a stage where there is huge amounts of funds flowing into ESG projects, partly because of, I would like to hope that for the nobility of the objective, but partly also, I suspect, from a fundamental understanding that finance has as to, getting in at the ground floor on an ecosystem which is, going to drive the future. So, I mean, a slightly more cynical view as to why finance, moves to where, the technologies and the markets of the future and the ecosystems are going to be created. So that's point number one. I think that movement we are seeing in solar also, where increasingly what you're finding now is that a lot of the renewable and the solar story is being funded by foreign, mega funds. So basically you need scale, you need huge amounts of money. Now you have two challenges. One is, of course, which historically one of the reasons why earlier funds were not tapped abroad is because of the foreign exchange risk. Historically you had a depreciating rupee against foreign currency. So, your interest rates kind of worked out rather high, but these are now being essentially absorbed. When I say mega funds, either the big guys coming in from outside or, guys domestically looking to go and list overseas and become big. But basically it's a big boys game now. It's no longer a cottage industry as it was when, Jain was started out initially in the 2010s, etc. when we were discussing policy with MNRE. So it's a big boys game. Two, contours of it's a bit like Swiggy and Zomato, where you're kind of expanding and expanding, hoping to naturally reach boundaries where you become large enough so that all essential risks and innovations, etc., absorbed in your scale in terms of your capture of size. That's one. The second is in terms of the markets of energy. Historically and even today, there are basically two ways in terms of, we're talking about two energy markets. One is we're talking about the energy market for electricity, and the other is we're talking about energy markets for other energy. The problem in the electricity markets has basically been twofold. One is the weakest link in the chain has been the discoms. The distribution companies have basically made a mess of everybody, when we were doing coal-based, shore-based coal, when we were doing wind, when, we were doing solar, all sorts of promises were made, and then, the discoms kind of have failed to, adhere to their commitments in terms of payments, in terms of asking you to curtail power, etc. So the whole thing is a mess. And the second is essentially, see, the recovery period of all of these solar powers, of all these renewable energy projects, are essentially mapped out to 20-25 year kind of recovery periods. Now, historically, if you remember, solar was done even at about 12 rupees, 13 rupees, 14 rupees in Gujarat. And then you had, people going in litigation saying that 13 is too high. Now, it's like down to 2.5, 3 rupees. Why should we honor? So two things critically, your entire structure of the economics of this particular sector is based on contract. So you basically have faith in whoever you've done contract with and hope, saying that, if and when it goes to adjudication, which surely will, saying that, the courts will give you some judgment, and invariably it's going to take time, and in that time you're going to die. So that's one, is essentially how strong is the contractual framework. And invariably, my experience has been governments are, will always find a way out once the economics of it, turn adverse and they find some political risk in it. You've seen it in terms of people refusing to sign PPAs where they bid out and stuff like that. So, A is faith and contract and, enforcement of the rule. B is, like I said, discom. Now, a critical thing that has happened, and which is why, I have a great admiration for the wisdom of Reliance and Mr. Ambani in terms of, as he has historically proven himself both in petrochemicals and in telecom, that when he makes a move, it's time to, reassess the market and see where it's heading. So, as Mr. Khatesal was saying, hydrogen, Reliance constituted a high-powered technical board, recently, I think with Mr. Mashelkar and others. He's seeing movement where hydrogen is on the cusp now of commercialization. So it might essentially end up following Moore's law in terms of, the speed with which, so it's basically about how much money you can probably throw at it and, get it to move rapidly down in terms of costs and scale. So if you're going to see movement in it, like say semiconductors with market rollouts like telecom, etc., 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, you're probably like to see the market structure shift. In which case, if you're in solar, you're no longer dependent on this bottleneck of, as I see it, the biggest risk today of default on contract and the discom basically, squeezing you by the throat. And you essentially go and sit with a kotora every, month and saying that, "Saab kuch paise dal do, mar jaunga main, loan repayment karna hai," and that kind of shit that is happening right now. So if this moves to, let us say, hydrogen And then, as again Mr. Katel sir said, the downstream distribution of that is already in place. I mean, so in a way, this is a backward integration for a chap like Reliance. You know, the distribution network's already in place. You can crack the technology part of it, which you're in a fairly reasonable zone at this particular point of time. And which is why I guess he's making his move now. You know, earlier there were all very nice noises which were made, but he never makes a move unless he sees the pieces falling in place. In telecom also, he wasn't a part of the initial movers into telecom. He only moved into Reliance Jio with 4G. My sense is he's again making a move, and which is a very shrewd and a very strategic move, to get into solar at a particular point of time where there is an alternate to your existing distribution systems of transmission companies and contract, and essentially look to get good lands with good irradiation and stuff, and probably also have a hedge and play the hydrogen market. So the path dependency of any investment is no longer limited to your traditional electricity sector. You have multiple options coming up, and then therefore, as a business, it probably makes a lot of sense to ramp up solar, acquire the land, put it up. The technology will sort itself out. I mean, silicon or whatever, etc. I mean, my sense is technology will sort itself out, but this is probably the right time to make a move into solar. That's my take on it.
Right. Thank you so much. I mean, much of this echoes one chat I had with another person familiar with what RIL is planning to do. I'm going to direct the logical question that comes from here to Mr. Jain. Mr. Jain, in this conversation that I had, one person was talking about the kind of state support that will be needed for this dramatic fall in the price of hydrogen. Right. Could something like a PLI scheme be launched for hydrogen? What about who should sort of bear the investments of setting up either a pipeline network or a transmission network to move electricity to electrolyzers, or move hydrogen from electrolyzers to consumption centers, so on and so forth. So a two-part question again. One, how do you see in the case of solar, how do you see the wider success factors beyond technology and finance in terms of, let's say, state support? And the same question again, more narrowly for hydrogen. What do you see happening there? I know that the government keeps setting up more and more task forces on it. So just give me your assessment of these and what they add up to.
I will start from the first principles. I have heard about the views and the thoughts of the panelists. Hats off to them, they have covered most of the points. Being the government or being the consumer, let's say being the government, now I would rather like to see that where is my control line in terms of the energy source. Okay. Now, Santosh sir has talked about capacity of the solar capacity addition, and then the storage, and then the solar modules, something like that. It's a heavy shortage to the extent of 25% of the total requirement that will be needed. One, we don't have the control over there, neither on the raw material nor on the technology side. Okay.
Right.
Second, cost of battery and the cost of battery storage and all those things. Again, the cost and the technology is not under your control. These are the two factors which is driving your sense of renewable energy, solar power or hybrid power. Okay. These two things are under not your control. Now, in just 15 days, last 15 days, what has happened? All this renewable power, I am a votary of renewable power. I am from Mytrah Energy. I am a votary of renewable power environment. Okay, don't take it otherwise. But who has come to the rescue of the India's energy sector? Again, everybody was crying about coal, because that is under your control as of now. Production is not happening to that extent because of the various issues and challenges, but at least that is under your control. So, having heard about the presentation, whatever has been shown by one of our esteemed colleagues, I do believe that India has to have the leverage and the control through certain degree of coal power plant. Going forward, even if we are talking of doomsday for the coal power, and it should be doomed. But when? Now, once the industrial production will start, GDP growth will come to that track, services sector will come to that track. Let's say, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years time frame. Now just tweak that particular energy requirement and whether the cost of technology, the PLI, all those things which is happening can satisfy the need of the India's energy requirement. I don't think so. I don't think so. We are depending upon third party. So that is one part of the story. So I think that we should not give a doomsday to the coal because you have the control right now only on that. Now, second thing what can be done is that we are talking of PLI schemes and various investment promotion schemes. Government is quite positive. Hats off to the Narendra Modi government in incentivizing and promoting all sorts of things. Very good. But again, are they going to incentivize the DNA of changing the DNA of manufacturing to DNA of R&D and the technology upbringing? Because you, in the lithium-ion battery, in the solar module, cells, wafers, you are continued to be the follower. Come what way, China is well ahead. They are 4 generations ahead, 3 generations ahead of you. So you will always be following the technology player and the skilled player. Okay, you cannot. Now, what needs to be done in this particular regard? My thought process is that this is all fine. Bring the R&D perspective and the DNA. Whether Reliance is talking of R&D, whether the government of India is talking of R&D, whether Adanis are talking of R&D, Niti Aayog is talking of R&D, they are majorly talking of manufacturing. Then you are always lagging. You are not leapfrogging. Now, what needs to be done is that, like in the mobile sector, where India took a big jump, big jump in terms of the UPI, in terms of various technological interface. Now, India is leading the world in terms of the fintech space, in terms of the digital technology. India is leading. China is also learning from India, and the world is also learning from India, from UPI, from the work which has been done. Now, India cannot be following the technological progress which is already happening. You are always falling short. Then you have to have a leapfrog in terms of the technology where H2 comes, hydrogen comes. Because then you are totally immune from that particular technological upgradation which has happened or which will continue to happen because you are always a follower. But in this one, you can take a lead without any baggage of lithium-ion battery, that storage, and all those things that is there. Now, the second aspect is that India should also start targeting, because battery storage is the key for the peak power address storage. Now, what Santosh sir has talked about, delineating that particular automotive side and the static energy storage. What my proposal will be that India should give a major push in terms of repurposing and the reuse of the mobile battery, which will be used and which is getting used, because after 2 to 3 years that will come to the market for the repurposing, and then utilize that particular battery and import that reused battery from the world. And India should become a hub for that particular import, and then India should invest in that particular R&D and creating some sort of mega capacity and come along with the PLI scheme for that, because that will save your storage cost, that will reduce your storage cost. So you will be able to address that particular part of the whole jigsaw puzzle in terms of the cost of storage, cost of battery. So all those things will be this one. So my second thought process is that repurposing, that should be, because India can become a hub for the import for that particular thing. We can get it from China, we can get it from many other places. So this one is the second part. Now the third one is that everything will go down the drain if discoms are not able to improve their financials, because somebody has to pay at the end of the day. Correct? I will pay, you will pay, but ultimately somebody has to pay. So discoms are under that concurrent list is there. So there are the issues and challenges. So what my thought process will be that wherever the BJP government is there in the state, let them prove that they can be able to reform this particular discom, which is under their control, make some sort of privatization, big ticket privatization, so as to prove it that it can be done. Why they are lagging in this particular area? Opposition party will always be talking about, no, I will not do it. But let them prove this particular thing. Are they really interested? Come election, free power, subsidized power, all sorts of things will happen. So are they really interested in this particular thing? You have to prove that you are interested in this particular thing by doing something. That is one. Another is that, like in the digital infrastructure, what is happening that the consumes from B to G, it is happening B to C or B to B. Okay. Now in the power sector, it's basically B to G. So once the government is in place in terms of the buying of taking something, all these sort of issues will be there. So can there be a trajectory from B to C or B to B for which decentralized power, democratization of this particular power sector should happen, because we have been listening from the government since last 20 years. In fact, 25 years, all those things are happening. But same story more or less there, except for few success stories, same stories there in the power sector. So why are we trying to create something which has not been done in the last 20 years? Because of various things, it could not be done. So make it B2C or B2B by democratizing this particular solar power sector or the battery, something like that, so that it is decentralized. And then try to see that, okay, if it is B2C, then the role of the government, role of the G will minimize, the role of discoms will minimize, for which whatever needs to be done in terms of the incentivization, that needs to be done. If you are talking about the utility scale projects, that is not the answer. When you are talking of so much big capacity, where is the land? So it has to be democratized. Rooftop, small plant, 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt, make it. Now what is happening in this particular sector? Biggies are there, only biggies are there. India can only progress not only from the biggies, but from the democracy. Democratization of this particular entire sector. Everybody starts participating in the journey of this particular area, which is not happening. I have the capital of, let's say, 1 crore. I want to invest. Where to invest? That has happened in the India's startup culture. That has given a boost to the digital infrastructure in the country because it has democratized the whole thing. It's not controlled by the biggies. Now in the digital infrastructure, no biggies are there. Tell me, who are the biggies? Zomato, Swiggy, Baju. They are making waves. They are making waves because of the control they have been able to take, because of technological upbringing and the technological innovations they have been able to bring. So government is not able to understand कर क्या रहा है वो लोग, कैसे कर रहा है. तो जब तक ये नहीं आएगा, तब तक गवर्नमेंट इंटरवेंशन करती रहेगी, इलेक्शंस आता रहेगा और जाता रहेगा. So that is one part of the whole story. Now, going forward, 25,000 megawatt per year solar capacity addition. Okay, somebody has talked about that 300 gigawatt in by 2030. अरे कैसे होगा? And then after 5 years, 4 years, you will say that okay, now we are nowhere in this particular area because we are not knowing the path. What Santosh sir has talked about कि 5,000 6,000 मेगावाट का तुम कर रहे हो, 25,000 मेगावाट का सोच रहे हो, उसका 20,000 कहां से आएगा? ये 4 साल के बाद में फिर तुम लोग आओगे. I'm just kidding. Coal. So don't doom the coal right now. You should have the multiple options, because the government of India doesn't have any control in most of the things. Hydrogen will come, and that should come because that is for India's interest. Then you are reducing your dependency on the fossil fuel, on the coal, and then you are creating much more capacity addition through this particular battery storage. That will suffice the interest. But it is a story of 5 to 7 years. What Santosh sir has talked about. Suppose the growth happens in terms of the energy demand, from where the power will come. all these story will go for a toss. So there is a story for coal, there is a story for hydrogen, there is a story for other energy sources also, but in other energy sources in the solar power, we are likely to be the follower. So we cannot afford this particular always a follower, because China will play its own game. And everybody will be starting playing its own game in controlling that particular semiconductors, fab chips, and all other things. Because ultimately everything is electronized now. You go to your flat and you will see that at least 5 laptops are running, 5 chargings are happening, all sorts of things are happening. So there is a need for that particular, and we don't have control on that. So summing up, that government is going in a very, very positive direction. All the right things are being done, but where the things are not happening is at the bottom end, at the consumer end, through the discoms. So that needs to be corrected. Many of the ills of this particular sector, energy sector, will go, can be addressed. So that is what some in substance I can make in before you. Some of the other points in terms of the contractual obligation, PPA assignment, and following that particular thing. Number of states, Gujarat, UP, Rajasthan, Punjab, AP, all have started talking of renegotiation. And after this renegotiation, you will feel that 25,000 megawatt solar capacity will be added on a yearly basis. Never. Somebody has to pay for that. And there is no sanctity of the obligation. Today or tomorrow, even the foreign investors, they are limited in number right now, they will also go away. So that particular sanctity needs to be there in this one, come what may, that needs to be there. So these are some of the thought process which I am having. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. One sort of follow-up question, which is that this notion of the government stepping in to build infrastructure for hydrogen, what do you think of that?
Look, government can incentivize through the capital subsidy, all those things. Government should not get into the business of manufacturing hydrogen. They will not be able to. They can always incentivize through the PLI scheme, through the policy regulation, something. And once the reliance of the world is there, and suppose that traction start happening, because they are also going to be the biggest consumer of hydrogen for their petrochemical plants. So they have the advantage. Let's in the next 3 to 4 years that the positive traction happens, then Reliance has a wherewithal to change the regulations according to the sustainability of the energy, India's energy demand. No other player.
Yeah.
I think so big, whether it's Adani or JSW or so whomsoever. So ultimately, it's good for the sector that Reliance should be getting the good traction for the hydrogen economy. It's good for the country, in spite of the fact that that may be going to, and much more concentration will be happening towards Reliance, so be it. But
yes,
India needs technological leapfrogging. India needs technological innovations, which is totally immune from this particular all sorts of nonsense which is happening in this particular solar power modules, wafers, cells, something like that. Then only India can have a sustainable future. Otherwise, India will keep on begging before the world about the energy sources. So they have to incentivize, promote the alternate technology, and that's what government is trying to do. Hats off to them, and they should rather much more incentivize that particular alternate technology and the R&D mindset, which China has already got, Europe and US already got. India is a energy deficit country. India has got the solution to its own problem on its own.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jain. Aarti, I'll give this back to you because I think we're already hit 1 o'clock. So if there are questions, we could go there perhaps.
Sure,
Hello?
Shekhar. I mean, I think for me, there was lots that was said by all the 3 panelists, and I would have wanted maybe, we have a little bit of discussion on them, but maybe I will ask 1 or 2 questions, and then we will see how it goes. And especially Mr. Jain, the point that you made about DISCOM's situation, and if that's not going to change, is there an option? So, for example, the railways is going to also commit to net zero now, and as a large institution will buy a lot of solar. So instead of thinking of DISCOM financial capabilities and their incompetence, so to speak, does it make sense for power developers to sell to large consumers and aggregated consumers? That's one side. And the other question that I have, which is also for anybody, maybe Mr. Hasurkar as well and Mr. Katlesal. So this whole point about how the transition that will happen will mainly be through big solar parks and the massive infrastructure that's coming up in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Karnataka, and some of you spoke of decentralized power. So should we build more parks? Because that discussion of decentralized, I think, has got lost somewhere along the way. So that's my second question. And the first one is if there is merit in talking of power developers selling to large consumers, but feel free, anybody on the panel, to please.
Yeah, I
Yes,
think
sir.
if I can venture to answer, I spent almost a decade trying to develop the B2C market hands-on in India. So first we thought it is awareness. First we thought industries go to an industrial area, convert one industry, let them convince them in 2011-12 I'm talking about, and then everyone will join the game because they can save 4 to 5 rupees a kilowatt hour, 50% of their energy cost. They pay less if they put solar on their roof. And why they will not do it? So this took 2 to 3 years. Then we discovered the second hurdle, the hurdle of financing. And in the financing hurdle, 100% collaterals was required by banks to lend for bilateral PPAs on B2C, simply because there was no sovereign involved, there was no counter guarantee involved. Hence, 100% standby letters of credit, SBLCs, had to be put up to raise debt, and that doesn't simply work because you're blocking all your collaterals pretty much for 3 to 4 years. Third, DISCOMs started fighting solar rooftop. DISCOMs started fighting 2 years ago. Gujarat was one of the first ones to fight, where they prohibited third-party energy sale on their rooftop. 2 years ago, Karnataka, which was doing really good, suddenly overnight, the regulator killed the rooftop market. So rooftop market, the DISCOMs are fighting. Now, why is it happening? My reading is it's all to do with energy pricing. You see, Sri Lanka, forget Europe, forget Japan and US, Sri Lanka have also got it right on tariff of energy pricing. The more the units a facility consumes, the lesser the rupee per unit should be charged. That should be the energy pricing logic. So if an industry consumes a lot of kilowatt hours, charge lower rupee per kilowatt hour for them. If a home consumes less kilowatt hour, charge higher rupee per kilowatt hour for them. This is right pricing strategy. India is doing the reverse of it. We are subsidizing homes. We are giving free, more or less, to farmers, some of them. Some of them are protesting because of that as well. And then we are taking the cross-subsidy burden and loading it on those who are consuming more. And when they go for solar, the government loses, the DISCOMs lose the exchequer. So my reading is none of the recapitalizing of DISCOMs, first avatar, second avatar that they are trying right now is really going to fix it, because the problem is in the tariff. The tariff needs to be right. It's counterintuitive to sound economics. That's because of politics. So this needs to fix. Will it happen? I don't live in a fool's paradise, so I don't think it will happen in the near term. But in the utopic world, it is good for it to happen. Yeah, that's the first part. So will the distributed solar work in renewable? Well, smart grids, generation happening on the rooftops, bilateral PPAs, my smart meter talking to my next door's guy's smart meter, negotiating PPAs on blockchain, and energy being sold is not a dream. It's practically possible. There are techs available today, technology to make it happen. Means that the grid can become bidirectional. The grid today is based on an old concept where energy was concentrated in dams for hydroelectric, coal pitheads for coal plants, and even for wind at certain places. And hence, big transmission networks were required. What today we are doing is we are simply using the old philosophy and simply plugging in large solar projects, which is wrong. Yeah, solar is good because sun shines down, resource is shining down on the consumer, unlike in other sources. So generate at the point. So practically, technically possible, geopolitically, I don't think in the near future it's going to work. That's my reading.
Fair point, sir. Would anyone else like to come in on this one? Rakesh, would you like to say something?
Yeah, so I agree entirely with Mr. Katesal. I mean, I have seen this from probably 97 or 98 when I was involved with the first unbundling of the Andhra, what used to be then called the State Electricity Board. So the easier parts were tackled, which was the GenCom and the Transcom, and nobody wanted to touch the Discom. And that's a story which is now more than 20 years old. So, I mean, after waiting for 20 years, as Mr. Katesal said, 20 years is a long time to wait. If it's not happened in 20 years, I mean, I'm not going to wait another 20. So from a business perspective, it makes sense to, look at alternates, which is what is now perhaps emerging in the solar story. The economics of an alternate will be driven by the market. So therefore, it has relatively lesser reliance on government and intervention and stuff like that and politics, which probably is the way that the market would shape up. I mean, we can talk about PLIs and we can talk about manufacturing. Honestly, over the last 50 years, I haven't seen much success in terms of those kind of interventions. So I'd put my money on market economics, probably panning out. I mean, while I may like it to be democratic, while I may like solar power at rooftops, etc., I agree with the economic philosophy of it. But having been in the sector and also saying that discoms are the big daddies in the room, you can't mess around with the discom. They will get you one way or the other. I mean, I've run solar plants. I mean, I've run renewable energy plants where I've tried to supply to high value industrial consumers, ended up in regulatory commission. Regulatory commission said saying that, "Arey bhaiya, why don't you sort it out?" Then they say saying that, go meet Secretary Energy. So you have essentially the chap who's chairing the discom also sitting in adjudication of a private developer's case saying that, so what sort of, I mean, the whole system is so my sense is the economics is what would probably drive the shaping of the industry as it moves forward.
Interesting. I mean, fair point that discoms are the big daddies. The economics will drive, but on the other hand, the discom economics are completely messed up. And every time you give them a blank check, and after a couple of years, you give them a blank check again, and this will continue till how long? And to Mr. Katlesal's point that, it's counterintuitive. You're subsidizing commercial and in cross-subsidizing the wrong players, and the residential is paying much lower. And, a couple of years back, we took some journalists to Germany to study the energy vendor, and I was one of them, and we were quite new in figuring out how this is done. And turns out that that's the first time I learned that in Germany, the residential pay more than the commercial. And, it is just not up to our mindset that you can have a cross subsidy, which is the other way around as well. But that seems to be the logic of economics. Certainly, I think there is no clarity then between what the real world situation is and what the political economy is. What I gather from what all of you said is that certainly the discoms and the uncertainties around it seem to be the fundamental point. Unless it is not solved, we will not find an answer. And there is no clear answer to how discoms and the troubles around that could be solved. But let me for a moment pause again. And yes, same in Australia, Vibhuti is saying. And Vibhuti at this point, not on this one, but maybe, Rakeshji talked a lot about the government of India's options and the fact that let's not, write off coal. And clearly, it's also evident in today's scenario. You explained that it's the short term for sure. How, because you also follow the debate on international climate policy, you look at it from the point of view of energy finance as well. What's your view once again on this one?
I would agree, Aarti, that we are not kind of saying write off coal completely. What I think even Aditya was saying, that we don't need any more coal. So India already has 70% of electricity being supplied through coal. And given that there is a huge amount of projects that are under construction to the extent of 33 gigawatt, and given that there is about another 55 gigawatt that is likely to be retired in the next few years till about 2030. But over and above that, there is no case for any new coal. And that's what he was stressing about the zombie assets. And if you will look at the situation, thermal assets are running at low PLFs of around 55%. Last year, with central power plants maybe a little better off with PLFs of 65%, and state and private power plants are the most impacted. So with greater deployment of renewable energy, the PLFs are likely to go down as these expensive power plants will compete with cheaper renewable energy. So while we are also talking, on the other hand, how to improve DISCOM financial situation. So why to burden them with expensive PPAs of thermal coal power plants? And there's no denying now that, renewables are cheaper. Batteries, along with battery storage, the competitiveness is still not commercially viable as of now. But the kind of, deflationary, we have seen RE, and we are expecting a similar deflation to happen in the battery storage space. This will become commercially viable in the next 2 to 3 years. So why because these are long-term investments, and these are huge capital investments that we are talking about. So why to lock finance in a project which is not going to see, or which is not going to be dispatched to make it commercially viable in the longer run? So rather invest or divert your resources, which are limited. We have limited financial resources, so why not put in doing more R&D, getting up to speed to domestic manufacturing of whether it's on RE and plus battery storage or other newer technologies like green hydrogen. So I think it's good to make your bets on these clean energy technologies and get the prices down, which makes it more profitable for all the players. And on the same time, you address your environmental concerns. So I think that should be the way forward, rather than putting your bets on fossil fuel industry.
So the thing there is that it then militates against the political economy of the moment, right?
Sorry, come again?
Sorry. Just that. So far, the counter argument to what you said has been that the political economy has not been very gung-ho about this idea, but maybe that changes with Reliance coming in.
Somebody did mention,
has a question.
Sorry, just quickly respond that economics is what will drive. And that's what I'm saying, that economics will change, the way we are adopting more and more RE because it's cheaper. Similarly, battery plus, RE plus storage will become commercially viable. And that's when they'll go more gung-ho about this option more.
Yeah, looks like that. Aarti, there is a question from Akshay Jaitley from Mr. Hasurkar. Could we take a look at that?
Sure. Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. There are several questions in Q&A, and we have little time, but maybe I will pick some of them. Can I? And in some order of how they were written. We have M. Ramesh from Hindu Business Line. I'll quickly take the questions. Please, panelists, could you help with quick answers as well? Why is solar thermal heat, not electricity, being so consistently ignored despite much better efficiency and returns? Is there anybody who can quickly answer this question? Yes, Mr. Khatel.
Solar thermal and solar photovoltaic started together 2010 in the Jain NSM policy. The government did not distinguish between the two. Solar thermal costs did not come down. The photovoltaics came down. Solar thermal also needs resources, a separate type of sunlight called DNI, direct normal irradiation, whose value needs to be higher than a certain amount. In other words, only sunnier part, really sunnier part like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, certain parts will be viable for this from a generation perspective. So resource not being spread, capital cost not coming down because of less economics of scale deployment are the two reasons why solar thermal took a backseat all over the world, not just in India.
I'll keep going. There is a question. There are many questions from Shishan, but I'll pick the third question for you, Mr. Hasurkar, which mostly talks about finance. So if that's an issue and basically the big boys can raise maximum capital, how easy or difficult it is to mobilize finance for smaller players, and any players from cottage industry era can come in. And I think that's also one question, which basically is that if low cost finance is an issue, I mean, are people like IRIDA and all, because you have been an older hand on this, you would know, but back in the days, maybe they were assumed to play a bigger role. Is there a role for them? But also to Shishan's question on, is it only the big boys or can there be more decentralized capital as well?
Actually, that's very interesting because in 2010, when JNSSM was being launched, we had this debate at which Secretary MNRE was also present, and there were multiple arguments being made as to what should be the shape of India's solar policy as it moves forward. There was one which was arguing the decentralized cottage industry, and the other which was clearly, of course, the big boys and largely the foreign players were saying that, look, go for scale, go for aggregation, and you'll be able to, ride the curve fairly quickly in terms of your scale and your costs. Both arguments had merit, but in terms of the way it played out, now when the first bids actually came out, what we discovered was that the winner of that JNSSM bid was a brass manufacturer from Moradabad, and we'd also put in bids, etc. And then, when the bids were opened, we all crowded around him saying that, he quoted some absurdly low number. And he said, saying that, boss, what are your economics? I mean, how do you want to make this work? He says, nahi, abhi bid aa gaya hai, abhi main sochunga ki isko abhi kaise work karane ka hai. So, there has been historically a jugaad kind of a tendency, saying that, let me first get the bid, and I have that confidence in the government system saying that I will, figure it out, saying that, I'll probably put some substandard material, do some wiggling around here and there. So an issue with cottage industry historically has been that. Second is the discoms are a big issue with regard to making it cottage. If it's a bigger player, obviously you have two gorillas of equal sizes, and discoms, in any case, to my mind, discoms have to be disintermediated. I mean, there are no two ways about it. If you're going to build a business model which has any degree of resilience, you can't be held to blackmail by discoms. I mean, the discom story has not been sorted out for the last 25 years. So to my mind, that's key element of anybody's solar or energy strategy going forward. On the financing front, it's now basically about scale and cost. There's not much, it's a fairly simple model, Lego model of solar and the others. There are not too many moving parts. It's not as if you're doing a petrochemical plant or anything. You have, so finance is a key driver. Therefore, foreign capital, ability to absorb losses. So no, I don't see either cottage industry or too much of a scope for IRIDA going forward.
Okay, clear. We'll keep moving. There are some more questions. Anybody in the panel? Again, a question which says that we are in a so-called golden window for the developers, since safeguard duties have lapsed and custom duties will be enforced only next year. And do you view this gap year? How do you view this gap year and the inconsistency in the import policy? Will it have any implications on the solar capacity development? Anyone can answer. Rakesh, would you like to go, Mr. Patel sir?
Your question was not so clear, so I think there was some vibration.
Sorry about that. You can also read in the Q&A on your screen. It's a question which is basically on this being a year where safeguard duties have lapsed and custom duties will come next year. So in the gap year, how will the implication be for solar capacity development?
Look, typically the developer doesn't see 1 year gap or half year gap. They would like to see the longer duration. Let's say construction period will be, let's say, 1.5 years to 2 years from the date of signing the LOI, and then the final construction, let's say 1.5 years to 2 years, let's say. So this 1 year gap, means people will be worried that what will happen, but people will be much more worried, as a developer will be more worried that what is the trajectory going forward in terms of the customs duty, in terms of the government policy, because their whole bid is happening, bid numbers are happening based on certain assumptions, which is taking care of 1 to 2 years developmental progress, which is going to be happening. So this 1 year gap or something like that, if there is a positiveness in terms of the economics to the developer, he will try to complete to the extent as fast as possible so as to gain that particular advantage. And if that is not if that is a disadvantage to them, then the developer will find some way or another to get out of the contract. Get out. And that is really happening. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, once the developer will be developing some project, they need some return. And that return should come within the assumptions which he has made in the Excel sheet and in the strategy. If both the things are not matching, if the strategic proposition is also not matching, he will try to come out of the contract, come what may. He will raise lots of issues in this point. And similarly, the discoms is also very much shopping this particular tariff, because both the parties are, I will say, both the parties are just checking each other. फायदा होगा तो आगे बढ़ेंगे, नहीं फायदा होगा तो I will find my way. Both the parties are doing because of the uncertainty in this particular sector because of various reasons.
Clear and very useful. We are close to 1:30. I'll take 2 minutes maybe and have 2 more questions, and then I'm afraid we'll have to leave the others, or we can put them on email. But again, a question for you, Mr. Hasurkar, on question by Akshay Jaitley, where he's asking that you spoke of alternative sources of selling electricity other than to discoms. Could you expand on that a little bit? And will these ever be enough to de-risk producers from selling to discoms in the first place, especially in the context of difficulties with open access?
No, I think I was misunderstood. I didn't mean selling electricity to anybody other than discom, because electricity necessarily has to flow through transmission lines. My point was more with regard to de-risking it through an alternate energy use. So if solar is converted into hydrogen, I plug into another distribution system, which is different and which does not have a discom in it. So that was my point in terms of if I were building a solar business to de-risk my solar business, instead of my traditional role of being a solar power generator, which then feeds in electricity into the transmission line, which is then distributed through the discom, and I'm dependent on a single, monopsony of discom as a buyer. I have an alternative to build a solar energy plant which does a hydrogen, and then through the hydrogen I plug into the petrochemicals network, for example. So there is an alternate pathway for de-risking my solar business. So to that extent, it's not that I cannot no longer be held to hostage where I will go bankrupt because, let us say, Tamil Nadu decides saying that, I'm changing my wind policy, or, after promising me the sun and the moon, then later turns around and saying that, no, you have to curtail your power because of my political compulsions or my financial condition. At the moment, as Mr. Jain was saying, everybody is held hostage by the discoms. You can go nowhere else because they're the gorillas in the room and you're held hostage. So my point was with regard to alternate channels of energy.
I'll ask one last question. I don't know if I've understood this correctly, but it's talking about energy markets and products like green term ahead market. And I think roughly the question basically would mean what kind of mechanisms like day ahead tariff or time of day tariff, better flexibility needs to be introduced to handle variability. Is there anything to be said? Anybody who wants to come in can please pick up this question, including Vibhuti, because I think you worked on these things as well. The thing of how do you handle, like, do you need to do things like time of the day, pricing, all of that, and then renewables can be better placed?
Definitely, Aarti, TOD pricing will be very, very critical in terms of, reforms. With better price signals, there'll be better appetite for financing as well as it will give a lot of confidence to developers to build plants, especially to meet, either peak power demand or to address any grid integration issues. So for better reliability, so if you'll have those price signals through time of day pricing, that will give enough confidence to build these flexible generation resources, which may not be available throughout the day, but are able to respond to any fluctuations, any rise in demand at a very short notice, and which then makes it commercially viable by earning right amount or high prices during those hours. So yes, those kind of policy reforms are a must.
And if I can quickly add to that,
Alright.
Aarti, just a sentence.
Sure.
I think going forward, I think we are looking at 450 gigawatts target, whether we like it or not. And I think in a world of higher RE, I think flexibility becomes that much more important, and demand side measures and consumer side flexibility, I think those become critical in actually understanding what kind of capacity India needs to add beyond what is already there, and how India can. So I think India needs to kind of also be not afraid of saying that it wants to move away from coal. I understand that coal is a necessity in the next 10 years, but time has come to actually balance the priorities and understand how we can reduce the reliance on coal. So yeah, I just wanted to add those 2 cents.
Fair enough. I'll pause. Shekhar, maybe we can give others the last word. Rakesh ji, Mr. Hasurkar, Mr. Khatel sir, anything that you have to say, and then we can wind up this panel. It's been quite an engaging conversation. There is always things that will be left because lots was said, but I'll just pause and see if anyone has any last words. Santosh ji, anything? A lot of what you said made a lot of sense. Any last words will be helpful.
Well, last words are actually coming from me. So I would say this, the government need not do anything to promote solar. All they need to do is remove hurdles they're creating. Yeah. So I would, after spending close to 2 decades in renewable energy, if they remove the hurdles, that will be good enough. The market forces will take it ahead. That's the last word.
My take is that we are saying gorillas, discoms as gorillas. Based on my experience, they are the most smartest chap in the whole ecosystem, discoms. Okay, they know everything. Whatever suggestion we are making in terms of the time of the day, demand side management, they know everything. They will teach you. They will teach you. All the panelists will be taught by them. The only thing is that they should start performing. As some political delinking happens, they can outcompete and ride the market and create the market for all these things if they are able to perform their economics. The rest of the things will be sorted out in terms of the market economics, in terms of the pricing or something. Everything will come up. There is a need for political delinking, at least for the next 4 to 5 years. No nonsense with the distribution company. India will pace ahead. Thank you.
Fair enough. That's a very no-nonsense comment. Just de-link yourself. Don't do anything. Remove the hurdles, and the sector will take care of itself. And that's it. Anything from you, Mr. Hasurkar? You've seen the highs and lows quite a bit.
So I think perhaps for the first time, I'm actually rather hopeful saying that the solar sector will sort itself out. I'm seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. Otherwise, this entire business of contractual and discoms, everybody's been running around in circles trying to catch their tail, not addressing core issues. Now with economics perhaps showing signs of becoming a key driver, I think the future for solar is looking really, really bright. And I think this is the time when, the really serious and smarter money will start coming into the game.
I have to hard stop. Sorry, I have to go for some other meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Jain, thank you so much.
Shekhar.
Yeah.
All right. We are 7 minutes above. Thanks everybody for joining, and special thanks to all the panelists. We will try and do a follow-up on this. This has been quite interesting and also just a lot of learning for all of us at Climate Trends and Carbon Copy. Thanks a lot. Have a good rest of the week and see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.